Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we had a ton of great games to break down here in Week 6 in college football. Before we get there, though, we've got Scout Stories, where Eagles Director of College Scouting, Alan Wolking, joins the show once again to talk about wide receivers and projecting them from college to the NFL. Ton of great takeaways here from Alan in this episode. Then we're going to transition to Saturday Scouting, where Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler are going to join the show to offer their Week 6 takeaways. And like I said, a ton of awesome games. So we've got some thoughts here coming out of Week 6 in college football. Then we've got On the Clock, where Chris McPherson returns to the show to host a debate between myself, Dane, and Ben, where we discuss the most versatile offensive player in the country. That is a conversation you don't want to miss. And then we've got a great question in our draft mailbag, talking about a little bit of a draft trend around the NFL. As always, make sure you go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a review. If you've got a question, we will answer it. Make sure you are subscribed. We're getting into the meat of the college football schedule. Now is the time. Make sure you are subscribed to the show, and it will get sent to your podcast device each and every week, twice weekly, from now through the NFL Draft. That said, let's get this show rolling here as we start things off with Scout Stories.
Pull up a seat. It's time for Scout Stories.
All right, well, here to talk about wide receivers here on the Journey to the Draft podcast is Eagles Director of College Scouting, Alan Wolking, here for Scout Stories. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Thanks, Fran.
All right, so let's talk about wide receivers, and obviously a position that everybody's got eyes on. Everybody's watching, looking for that next big name pass catcher every round of the draft, one of the deepest positions year after year after year after year. What in your mind is the toughest part about projecting college receivers to the NFL?
Coming from college, there's such a variety of player usage and player type. College schemes aren't always translatable. Route variety and routability, they're not always as visible as we'd like. A school might be asking the player to do something specifically narrow just based on their role or their scheme. Also, I think in some ways, the position can be quarterback reliant. So if the ball's on target, the player gets more opportunity to show what he can do at the catch point and after the catch. So that may affect the evaluation.
Yeah, that's to me, it makes it so difficult because more so than maybe any other position, I feel like you're reliant on everything else kind of going your way. The play call, the decision-making, the quarterback, the actual throw, everything else has to kind of work your way as the receiver to be able to see that high volume. And you have some guys that are in an offense where they're going to see, just because of the nature of the scheme, you're going to get chance after chance after chance, where some guys don't get that opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. So, as an evaluator, you're kind of at the mercy of what the scheme allows you to see and what the quarterback allows you to see, and then the level of competition as well.
Yeah, and that's when, I guess, when you get into private workouts, you get the all-star games, seeing them in practice. So, that's a set of experiences, exposures that fans don't necessarily get. That's where all of that comes into play.
For sure.
All right, let's get into what the separating factors here. What is it that separates a good receiver from a great receiver in your mind?
Yeah, they come in all shapes and sizes. I think for me, it would be, often it's an A trait. Does he have rare hands? Does he have rare speed, rare route skill, exceptional after the catch? Does he have something that's unusual? Typically, if you look at the good ones, there's something about them that just makes them different.
Yeah, so it would be like, just kind of having that trump card to be able to lean on to kind of set yourself apart, as opposed to being maybe a C+ or B across the board, having that A trait. I think that's an easy way for us to be able to look at it. When you look back on your career, has there been one piece of advice or a piece of advice you've gotten from a colleague or from a superior that's like really, really stuck with you when it comes to evaluating wideouts?
Yeah. Nothing comes to mind. I guess I'd say, that piece of advice, it might be on the horizon, is we've going through this draft process with Coach Sirianni, and his staff is awesome. Between, Nick and Coach Patullo, Coach Moorhead, we have such an awesome group of guys when it comes to this position. They bring a ton of energy and a ton of insight when it comes to this position. So I'm really looking forward to talking to our guys about this position group as we kind of continue on.
How fun is it? Because you've been a part of a couple different coaching staffs here with the Eagles, where a new staff comes in and you have now like a whole new set of opinions and thought processes and backgrounds, not just at wideout, but every position on the board.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it changes for some positions more than others, right?
Yeah.
Scheme specifically, it's different every time you change in offense and defense, how it goes. But you learn a bunch from schematically how coaches coach, what they're looking for, what they value. It's been really good for me professionally to develop that way.
And we've talked on this podcast a number of times, that during that time of year, obviously a very tough time of year, is that last week of December into January when there's coaching turnover around the NFL. For scouts, they've already evaluated all these players in their area. Now, when a new coaching staff comes in, it's just like, all right, we have to change the lens, and that might change the number of names you're filtering upwards. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, that's how it happens. But you know what? Sometimes it's valuable because you end up with two interpretations on the player. One, how he might have fit the previous group, and then go forward, how he might fit the next group. So you kind of get to do it twice, which, sometimes can help you scrutinize, how you feel about the player.
When you reflect on your early days as a scout, when you first got into the business, are there areas in scouting receivers, maybe opinions that you had early on in your career that you're like, man, like my opinion or my thought process has really kind of changed now as I sit here today?
Yeah, I think the game's getting just so much faster. It's just, I think speed is just, and not that speed has always been so important, but I think the ability to separate really kind of distinguishes players in this category. And I think just over time, you start to see that's a skill that we need to emphasize. So it's speed and separation. But, I think ultimately from, 10 years ago to today, it comes down to, can you win off the line of scrimmage? Can you separate in the route? How are you at the catch point? How do you finish? And then is there something else? Are you a great blocker? Is there a special teams attribute? Is there something else? But I think we are, speed is really emphasized, but I think the basic tenets of the position have probably remained the same.
And then just last question, just reflecting on Devontae Smith, who the Eagles made their first round pick just a few months ago now in April's draft. Your thoughts on Devontae coming out, obviously a heavy part in that selection.
Yeah. I mean, we talked earlier about having a trump card. Like, he's a guy who probably sits on a couple, which you don't see, a guy who has a multiple A traits, it's so hard to find. And Devontae, he's a guy that from a route running perspective, speed perspective, hands perspective, a lot of those things register A's on the grade sheet, which it's pretty uncommon. So he's got all those things. And then, I think we'll talk about his frame and things like that. It gets talked about in the media, but find me somebody that ever said, that there's a lack of play strength. I mean, this guy is very strong to the ball. He was one of the better blockers in college football. And I think he led the college football in yards after catch each of the last 2 years. So you have a guy who's strong away from the ball, strong with the ball, and then all the things kind of before the catch are really good. So I'm very excited about Devontae.
And obviously everything working upstairs as well. From the mental side, he brings everything to the table. Alan, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast to talk about wide receiver play. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Fran.
Well, great stuff there from Alan Wolking. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Really loved what he had to say, just talking about the wide receiver position and how so much of it can be dependent on the situation, right? The college usage, the variety of routes, they can be quarterback reliant, right? And so it's almost tough to separate and kind of really focus in on the traits that the wide receiver brings to the situation. I think it's what makes evaluating wide receivers so hard, and I'm so glad that that's exactly what Alan brought up in that conversation. The separating factors: does he have an A trait? Does he have a special trait that can set them apart? I think that's a really important takeaway. And then also just kind of getting his thoughts on working with a new coaching staff and getting their whole set of expertises at every single position across the board. I have to understand that's got to be a really fun part of the process, not just leading up to the draft, but even coming out of that. Once you get to May and June and July, the scouts are in the building. They can start having those kind of conversations with the coaches to kind of pick their brains on what they're looking for. That's got to be a lot of fun for sure when you're building up to the football season. And then just his thoughts on Devontae Smith. I thought that was interesting. Obviously, Devontae continuing to string together game after game of success with this Eagles offense. Now, let's turn our attention to this week in college football. We're going to kick things off now with Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell. It's time for Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, time to shift our attention here to week 6 in college football as I welcome in Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell. Guys, just a ridiculous weekend of college. I felt like this was one of the best weekends yet of this season. It started late last week. We had the huge game on Friday from Coastal. We had a big win for Cincinnati on Friday night. But then you get into the drama that started with the 12 p.m. games on Saturday. From start to finish, it was outstanding. Let's get into our game balls, though. And Dane, I will come to you first. Who gets your game ball, your standout player from the weekend?
I went with a player who actually was on the losing side Saturday night. I went with Jameson Williams, wide receiver from Alabama. He's flashed all year. But I think that how he performed in that loss to A&M, it really was his breakout performance. And I think it made it clear he is the number one playmaker on that Alabama offense. He finished with 10 catches, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns, all were career best. The route acceleration, outstanding. He's so explosive out of his breaks. The game really showed his ability to make those sharp 90-degree cuts without gearing down. He can snatch the football without breaking stride. He will occasionally fight the ball, but he did have a drop in this one, but he can flip his hips. He can make adjustments at the catch point. So there's a lot you could do with a talent like that. Before the season, we were talking about John Mechie as the Alabama receiver to watch, but I think Williams has passed him as a prospect, in my opinion. And just one of the more dynamic receiver options that we have in college football. So, even though Alabama was on the losing end, Jameson Williams certainly left a lasting impact.
Without, this is going to come off like a subtle flex, subtle brag on my part. But like 3 or 4 people texted me on Saturday during this game, during the A&M Alabama game, and about Jameson Williams. One of them was an NFL scout and was just like, I haven't done him yet. I was asking if I had studied him, but just watching the game was really impressed with what he had done. Really, Jameson Williams, a really, really impressive showing.
Did you know he was an Ohio State transfer?
Right. I did know he was the Ohio State transfer. Ben, I know you had talked about him there on the show in the past as well after making that transfer. But yeah, Jameson Williams, really, really impressive performance there against the Aggies. Ben, let's bounce this over to you. Who gets your game ball this weekend?
Well, I think it's pretty clear at this point. This is a deep and exciting tight end group. And these guys are showing out on a weekly basis, and it's seemingly a rotation this week. Let's give some attention to Coastal Carolina tight end Isaiah Likely, who had 8 for 232 and 4 touchdowns against Arkansas State. You heard me right, 232 and 4 touchdowns. I think they threw like a Y leak play, a pop pass off run action, showed a little yards after catch and a pass in the flat, and then high pointed one in the back of the end zone over like double coverage. Coastal Carolina's put up 50 points in 4 or 6 games. They're 6-0. You ever see that teal team on and the long words in the box score, Coastal Carolina? Watch them. Watch Grayson McCall. It's a really fun offense. Keep your eyes out for Isaiah Likely at tight end. This guy's got 101 career receptions, 16.3 average. And guys, the last 3 years, he's 3rd in contested grabs behind who? Charlie Kohler at Iowa State and Kyle Pitts. Pretty good company there among tight ends. But it's a deep tight end group, whether it's Weidermeyer, Jaleel Billingsley, Kohler, Jake Ferguson at Wisconsin, Cade Otton, James Mitchell, Henderson, Mike Martinez at UCLA. There might be 10, 15, 20, 25 deep at tight end prospects that may have draftable grades. It's a really fun group.
And he had a 99-yard catch in that game against Arkansas State Friday night or Thursday night. How many tight ends? I mean, I'm sure it's happened before, but how many tight ends in the history of college and NFL football have a 99-yard reception? It can't be a long list.
11.
See, I knew you'd know it.
I just made that up, but it's all attitude. So if you act like it's the right number, but no, that 99 yards, that was the RPO little pop pass where he just split the defense and kind of ran away from everyone. He's got juice in the open field. He's got good size too. He's like 6'4", almost 260. He puts his hand in the turf, catches everything. Go check out Jim Nagy's Senior Bowl Twitter account. He put up a pass where he had to pluck one all the way behind his body a couple weeks ago. Really, really reliable target. He blocks his butt off. He's got the speed. He's a really interesting player.
Go ahead, Dave.
So maybe it's recency bias or just, on my part, but it reminds me a lot of, Brevin Jordan from last year.
That type of body type for sure. Yeah.
Right. He's athletic as a pass catcher. He can help you out a little bit as a blocker. He's a good player.
Well, I mentioned Coastal Carolina just lighting up the scoreboard. I mean, the numbers that they've put up have just been outstanding. So much fun to be able to watch. That said, we had some games go down to the wire. I'm sure we'll talk at some point about this Texas-Oklahoma game, the Red River Shootout, but Ole Miss and Arkansas. I mean, 52-51. Ole Miss comes out with the win with an upset over the Hogs. And Matt Corral, I'll give him my game ball to. Now, when you look at the box score, you say, all right, well, he completed 14 passes and he threw 2 touchdowns. But to me, like the throws he made under pressure and the throws he made late in the game, by the way, he also ran for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. But when you just look at what he did in crunch time, he hits a beautiful ball to Braylon Sanders downfield on a double move, just laid it out in front. One of those where Lane Kiffin chucks the play sheet mid throw. Just to me, like Matt Corral, you love the energy on the sideline, just him getting his guys riled up. Look, there were other guys that stood out. Snoop Connor at running back, he runs for over 100. Parrish ran for over 100. Ben, I think you tweeted out the box score after the game. You're like,
107.
Ole Miss nearly had 3 guys run for 100 yards. Like, what did I miss?
Did Lane Kiffin lose a bet that he had to run the ball almost 50 times? I didn't know what was going on. I didn't watch this game. I'm just looking at the box score here. 107 rushing attempts for 670 something yards and 9 touchdowns. Arkansas, we've seen that before. Ole Miss, that's kind of new territory for Lane Kiffin, who normally likes to air it out.
No doubt. And that's why, to me, like I just look at this as a great team win there for Ole Miss. But, man, Matt Corral was awesome. Shout out to KJ Jefferson as well, the Arkansas quarterback. A little bit limited in terms of like his passing skill set, but, man, he put the team on his back and almost willed them to victory. It was an awesome game to watch. It was really, really fun. But Matt Corral, I thought, to me, gets the game ball. Let's now move into our next category here, guys. Let's go to our one-play takeaway. And, Dane, we'll come back to you for this one.
One of my favorite players to watch each and every Saturday is Kyron Williams, Notre Dame running back. He's such a tough competitor. He impacts the game in so many ways. And then on Saturday against Virginia Tech, he had 2 touchdowns, and both of them put Notre Dame ahead. One of those came in the late third quarter. It's 3rd down from the 10-yard line. Williams takes the handoff, shoots through the hole, steps out of 1 tackle, makes another guy miss, and then fights through 2 more tackles, would-be tacklers, runs into the end zone. He's so impressive. He's such a hard competitor, low to the ground, outstanding balance and footwork. He's got that strong lower body. It's just a joy to watch. And, I think this play really, really showed that, with the way he can impact the game and the way he kind of just, wills himself to make plays that a lot of backs aren't making.
Yeah, he's a really fun player. And honestly, he's kind of like the lifeblood of that Notre Dame team right now. Ben, what about you? What's your one-play takeaway?
Well, I want to give some attention to some of these undefeated teams, not Georgia or Iowa or Cincinnati or Oklahoma, but Michigan State, of course, 6-0. They are rallying, guys. They are hot. I'm sure they'll finish the season 7-5, but right now they're 6-0. Got to give some attention to those skill players. We're talking about them every week. Kenneth Walker, another 233 on the ground for Michigan State, but Jaylen Naylor really came out 5 for 221 and 3 touchdowns. My one-play takeaway, 63-yard touchdown where he showed really good tracking ability. He was pretty much squeezed to the sideline and said, you know what? I'm going to bounce this back inside, and then showed some open field ability with some speed and some creativeness. This is a guy from Bishop Gorman. He's got all sorts of track backgrounds. He may be a guy that doesn't really eclipse the exciting production in college, but he's going to make an NFL roster with his athleticism, his deep play threat, his returning ability, not to mention the other receiver, the Western Michigan transfer. I don't know where this, Cinderella story is going to die for Michigan State and Wake Forest or these other teams. There's some really good players. I'm going to keep giving them attention every week until they fall off a cliff next month.
I mentioned, if Michigan State and Kentucky somehow get matched together to play in a bowl game, you're going to be on the road. I don't even know what games you're going to be working for the NFL that week, but you're going to be.
Now, Wake Forest might fall off. Michigan State may be a darling team this year. I think Mel Tucker and some of the things they're doing out there, really, really good program. Ron Burton coaching the D line, all sorts of prospects on both sides of the ball.
All right, well, let's round it out here with Texas A&M and Oklahoma. Obviously, a huge game, upset number 1. Texas A&M comes up with a big W after losing 2 straight. How about backup quarterback Zach Calzada coming in, leading them to victory? Made some big time throws in this one, guys. And towards the end of the game, he ties it late in the fourth quarter with a slot fade to the dynamic Aeneas Smith, a player, Ben, I know you've talked about numerous times. Dane, you've talked about him numerous times. Kind of like a Kadarius Toney, running back, wide receiver, hybrid type player. Comes up with a big time catch down the field. Calzada makes this throw, gets throttled. He's hurting on the sideline afterwards. Was slow to get up on the play. But those two hooking up, Calzada to Aeneas Smith to tie it late in the fourth quarter. And then A&M obviously hitting the field goal to win it late, but just an outstanding play, a really fun game to watch. I caught most of the first half and all the second half. Just a really, really fun game from start to finish there with the Aggies getting the upset win.
So, there's so much NFL talent on that field, and credit to that quarterback. A&M losing to Mississippi State and being unimpressive most of the year, and I don't think anybody saw this coming, maybe except for those guys in the A&M locker room. And so credit to them for pulling the upset.
Well, one of the other big surprising outcomes was Oklahoma getting the win over Texas, and only surprising because of how the game started. Texas jumping out to that crazy lead. Spencer Rattler gets benched. Then Oklahoma slowly brings themselves back in the second half. They end up getting the win. And for my down the road freak show, we're going to talk about a guy that we talked about over the summer. And that's true sophomore wide receiver from Oklahoma, Marvin Mims, who made just a ridiculous catch on a 56-yard catch to tie the game late. It was a touchdown, 56 yards, where he's diving to the ground, makes the catch away from his frame, going to the turf, comes away with the grab. He had 2 touchdowns on the day, over 130 yards receiving. Marvin Mims, I think he's going to be a guy we're talking about very early in next year's draft, but he is absolutely a guy. When Oklahoma is on TV, Marvin Mims, worth the price of admission.
Well, he wasn't the most electric star in that game, and not even the most electric down the road freak show. You got to go to the other side. Receiver Xavier Worthy from Texas, little 6 foot, 160-pound receiver out of nowhere. I had never heard of. I'm sitting there looking him up during the game. He had 9 for 261 and 2 touchdowns. These are just silly video game numbers I'm repeating from Isaiah Likely, Jaylen Naylor, Xavier Worthy. He's only 160 pounds, but he's a 10-5 100-meter guy from high school, all sorts of electric speed. He's just got there at Texas. We'll see if Steve Sarkisian can really find a way to get him the ball and keep feeding Bijan Robinson.
And the best play that he had was he had the fumble on that kickoff return, but then the next series he turns around and has that long touchdown catch. So credit to him for blocking that out, moving on. It was just a really impressive day from him.
Hey, really quick, you guys. I know we'll keep highlighting Bijan Robinson. Texas is really running the ball well. Does Texas offensive line have any true prospects? Derek Kerstetter, who's played up and down there. I know Denzel Okafor is a pretty good-sized guard as well. Is there anyone you guys know about or maybe are excited about from that Texas offensive line? Because Steve Sarkisian is going to feed the ball to those backs and hopefully let the run game be the lifeblood of that offense. So I just want to know, is there any prospects up front there?
So Senator is the only guy I've watched. I don't. The other guys I think are mostly underclassmen, except for Okafor. Have you seen any of them? Frank?
So I had gotten a tip on Junior Angelau, who's 6'6", 316 pounds. He is a redshirt junior, and he was a guy to just keep an eye on. I have not studied from this year to see if he's made that jump, but certainly a name that I'll be watching once we get into digging into that offensive film. I guess the other big thing from this game, guys, obviously, Spencer Rattler, getting benched in this game. He got benched in this game a year ago, came back and led Oklahoma to an overtime win. Not the case here this year. So, look, at the end of the day, Rattler's just not playing well. And we've talked about how he's kind of like one of those yo-yo prospects, right? Where a lot of high variance in the way he plays. Right now, it's just been too far on the low end. And so we'll see, what that means for him moving forward. But unless the play completely turns around, I can't imagine.
Dane, even when he is playing well, what about him excites you? It's so erratic. It's so out of structure. It's so just make things happen. I'm sure it drives the coaches crazy in the film room and on, Sunday and Monday watching the games back. Like, what excites you guys about Spencer Rattler? Is this a through and through traits-based, quarterback that you think he's going to get to Sundays and all of a sudden be a polished quarterback?
Yes.
Well,
that's it, right?
A lot has been talked about how unfair it was to talk about him as a top prospect after just 1 year. And I think it's completely fair when you look at how he played down the stretch last year. throw on the game against Florida, and some of the throws that he's making are so impressive. He's not making critical mistakes. I thought down the stretch last year, he did enough where you're thinking very optimistically moving forward and into year 2 with another offseason under his belt. So I think all the praise headed his way as maybe being a top pick and one of the better quarterbacks. I think it was completely fair. Now, this year, nothing has warranted that. I mean, he has not played up to that level this year. And it's tough to figure out. Is it a confidence issue? Is it, maybe it's just, there's something else going on behind the scenes. There's a lot to pick apart here. But what does this mean moving forward? If you're Spencer Rattler, you're likely, now we don't know who's going to start next week, but it's a good chance it's going to be Caleb Williams. And so if you're Spencer Rattler, if you lose your starting job the rest of the season, are you, forget the NFL, are you looking at transferring? Are you staying put, trying to battle for the job? I guess I'm not asking you guys to answer that because we just don't know, but it will be fascinating to track the rest of the year.
This is kind of an unfair hedge statement, kind of protects myself. This kid could turn into Matt Stafford or he could turn into Brian Bennett. And I probably wouldn't blink at either. Brian Bennett, the Oregon transfer, went to Southeast Louisiana, so similar size, kind of play style, never really materialized as anything. And Matt Stafford, we know who Matt Stafford is. I just find Spencer Rattler to be all over the spectrum as far as projections and the type of quarterback you're getting.
I think the big thing watching him over the summer, and that's why so many of the comparisons went back to Patrick Mahomes, different body types. But when you watch Mahomes, even going back, recently I went back and just looked at my Mahomes notes with him coming out. And it was athletic, can create, obviously great arm strength. The accuracy and ball placement was pinpoint, but lives outside of structure, does not play within structure. And can he rein that in? And that was the big question. There were NFL coaches and NFL staffs that felt the same way, didn't love Patrick Mahomes coming out. And, it took, the Kansas City Chiefs trading up, and we know it only takes one kind of mantra. But I think when you look at Spencer Rattler, the issues that he has, in my opinion, have not all been about accuracy and ball placement. It's decision-making, it's playing within structure, it's understanding how to play with poise and manage the pocket. And things that you don't often see from young quarterbacks in college, but man, the inconsistencies have just been too much. And that's cost him some quality play here this year as a redshirt sophomore, still very young and very early on in his career.
And one thing I want to add too is, if this isn't he's not a media creation. And I mean, the NFL teams were, excited for his potential as well. Let's just say that, teams had to draft last May for the 2022 draft. And based on the information we knew then, Spencer Rattler would have been a top 15 pick if the draft happened this past May, based on the information teams had right then and there. So, NFL teams were excited about him. Now that's not the case anymore. So it's, he needs to go to prospect rehab, and figure this out. But like you said, Fran, he's a young player, still a lot that is going to happen before he reaches the NFL.
Dane, I don't think we got your down the road guy. We've been so caught up with the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, going back to that A&M Alabama game, I'm going with Devon Achane, one of the best players in the country with the ball in his hands. He had that 96-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. I think he'd be a lot more well-known if not for Isaiah Spiller being RB1 in that offense. But he's just such an explosive guy with the ball in his hands. A big track guy, too. He also runs track at A&M. I think his personal best was a 10.14. At A&M. So this guy just has blazing speed, a lot of fun to watch. We talk about that sophomore running back class, how good it is with Bijan Robinson and Tank Bigsby. Achane is right there in that mix as one of the special dudes in that 2023 running back group.
I like it. Well, let's round this conversation out with our film room recap. Guys that we've studied on film over the last week caught your eye. I'll start this one off if you guys don't mind. I've been watching just, picking positions. All right, let me watch a handful of guys here and there. And I've been watching a handful of corners. And so I watched Roger Mccreery over the weekend. Mccreery is the real deal. Really, really impressive. And Dane, you've talked about him plenty. So I don't want to dive too deep into Roger Mccreery, but he is really, really impressive. The one guy I will talk about, FAU corner Zion Gilbert. Now, I didn't know much about Gilbert. He was on the freak list over the course of the summer, and that was kind of how I found out about him back in August when he showed up on the freak list. That said, he was also on the Senior Bowl watch list. So I'm like, all right, let me watch a corner, small school guy, freak list, and Senior Bowl watch list. He's 6'1", 182. Let's see what we got here. So reported 4.3 speed from Bruce Feldman in the freak list article. That speed shows up. And then you dig into the bio on Zion Gilbert, 4-year starter in the secondary for the Owls down at FAU. Began his career at free safety, strong safety the first 2 years, then transitioned to nickel. And then the last 2 seasons has been an outside corner. So you've got positional versatility, proven positional versatility to play everywhere in the secondary. And again, at 6'1", 182, I'm just watching it. At first, I'm like, man, this guy looks just like L'Jarius Sneed at Louisiana Tech. Like he's that same kind of profile. Sneed kind of bounced back and forth between outside corner and safety. He's been a kind of a big nickel for the Kansas City Chiefs and has worn a lot of hats for that defense. But then the more I watch, guys, I'm like, why can't this guy turn into James Bradbury, who was a day 2 pick, turned into a solid starter with the Panthers, and has turned into a really good starter with the New York Giants. I see a guy that obviously we talked about the speed, but the size and the speed and the versatility, but extremely aggressive. I love him coming downhill. He chases plays from the backside all the time. He's not a leggy athlete. You would think, 6'1", he's a little bit leggy in transition. No, like this guy gets in and out of breaks really well. I talked about the recovery speed. He easily stays in phase with vertical routes. He's only got 3 career interceptions, but again, kind of bouncing around, playing in the nickel, playing at safety. I think that can affect a guy's ball production. But guys, this guy really, really impressed me. It would not shock me at all if he goes through the All-Star game process and we start hearing his name more and more kind of rise. Because and maybe I just woke up on the right side of the bed, that morning, and I hit on all the right spots with my breakfast and everything. But this guy, I was like, he looks like an NFL starter out of corner. I was really, really impressed with Zion Gilbert from FAU.
I haven't done him. I have his freak list numbers and literally his position changes, and I'll get to him when I get to him. But that was a pretty good breakdown on him. It sounds like a pretty exciting player out there.
Yeah. Ben, we'll bounce this to you. Who do you like here for yours?
All right. So we're going to go up into the trenches here. We got to start talking about Florida State edge rusher Jermaine Johnson, guys. Because this is a really, really intriguing, interesting, high-level prospect, in my opinion. He's 6'5", 265. Remember, let's go through the background. Via Georgia, there for 2 years. Via Last Chance U, Independence. Via Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Not the most traditional route to Florida State there, but he is a long, lean, explosive stand-up edge rusher. Plays that outside linebacker DN role. He's got really good bend, but his long arms and quick hands and long strides are just make scouts salivate when you're watching him. And his loose hips. I mean, all sorts of chops and clubs to soften the edge with the loose hips and the strides and the explosiveness. Covers a lot of ground when he's in space. You see the closing speed, the burst to close. Once he does clear those tackles, huge hit, I think, against Louisville. I put up on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, just blasted the quarterback. Tons of plays out to the sideline. Almost like everyone's watching him and he knows it, and he's playing harder than harder out there, right to the echo of the whistle. Already up to 8 sacks this year, 23 pressures. He reminds me a little bit of a combination of Josh Allen at Kentucky and Jason Oweh at Penn State.
Wow.
I kind of want to merge them together, and I think he's a really ready NFL player. Now, obviously, the background's a little messy, hop around from school to school. I don't think he was eligible out of high school. That's why he went JUCO Independence, then to Georgia for 2 years. Just got caught in a deep Georgia front seven, couldn't get on the field like he had wanted to. I think we know the level of prospects Georgia gets on that front. Really tough to leapfrog guys like Adam Anderson and Azeez Ojulari. But a little bit of Joe Tryon, maybe a throwback to kind of Gaines Adams and Quentin Moses, the tall, long, explosive edge rushers. I mean, Gaines Adams was a top 5 pick about 15 years ago. Quentin Moses was a 3rd-round pick out of Florida. But he's a really fun player, and he's a productive player. Put on the tape there. That Florida State front seven's got some dudes, whether it's Robert Cooper, Jermaine Johnson. There's some exciting top-level talent in that defense.
I like it.
Yeah, Johnson's awesome. He's a guy that was buried at Georgia, like you said, and now that he's kind of being that alpha, he's been terrific. So yeah, it's good to see him emerge. I thought about going with Kenny Pickett here because I did a deep dive on him. I've got a film room coming out this week with a special guest on The Athletic, so hope people check that out. But this morning I watched the Penn State Iowa tape from this past weekend, and I want to talk about, I know we're supposed to pick one player here, but I want to talk about that Penn State defense a little bit. All these guys, it's maybe my favorite defense to watch. They're just a lot of fun. It's up there with Georgia, just in terms of guys to watch, guys that are fun because they play their tails off. Pickett at defensive end, it seems like he learns more and more each week how to play the position. He's so long. He's so fast. The motor never quits. There were 2 plays where he's making tackles that were like 40 yards from where he started. I mean, it's so relentless in his play. It's really impressive to watch. And then Jesse Lucetta, is he a defensive end? Is he a linebacker? What is he? I just know he's a heck of a football player. It's really fun to watch. He's got just a twitchy lower body. Another guy that's just relentless with how he plays. Some tweener skills, so I don't know where he's playing at the next level, but he scratches and crawls, finds a way to get to the football. He's a lot of fun to watch. Ellis Brooks, Braden Smith at the linebacker level, and then of course Jaquan Brisker in the back end. His range, his toughness, his ability to beat blocks. So that Penn State defense, I couldn't pick one guy to talk about. There are just so many on that side of the ball for the Nittany Lions that just makes it a lot of fun when you're studying that tape.
You know, that linebacker trio of Lucetta, Brandon Smith, Ellis Brooks, I thought they really showed up in that Auburn game. That was a really fun game for them.
I'm going to hold you to this, Dane. Who's the highest drafted of that group in your mind?
Oh, man, that's tough. I mean, I think when you look at it, like Brisker, who besides Brisker in the senior class among the safeties are you getting excited about? I mean, there's nobody, in my opinion. There's plenty of underclassmen to get excited about, but Brisker's the only senior among the safeties that I'm excited about. So, he's probably, somewhere in the day 2 range. Ebiketie keeps moving up. I mean, that's a really tough question to answer. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer there. Mustafer's been better. I know, Castro Fields has traits. I haven't, kind of loved him this year, but he has traits and he's going to go probably somewhere top 100. I'll go Brisker. I think that it comes down between him and Ebiketie, but I'll go Brisker because he's a really talented safety who can help out in a lot of different ways.
Come on, Dane. There's a clear-cut answer. Unfortunately, we just have to wait about a year, 2 years because it's Joey Porter Jr. out there at corner, who I think may be a first-round pedigree corner. We just have to wait a calendar year or 2 because he's still, I think, only a sophomore out there.
Yeah, he's an impressive player. Looks the part. I mean, he is
no question. 6'2", 190, long, tall, fast, explosive.
That's how you draw him up for sure. Well, guys, we talked about a bunch of players, and like I always say, we're going to talk about 3 more. It's time now to welcome in Chris McPherson for On the Clock.
On the Clock.
All right, well, let's keep this show rolling here with On the Clock as we welcome in CMAC, Chris McPherson. And CMAC, hit us with a topic here because we've got a tight one here, 2-2-2. Everybody's got 2 wins under their belt.
Doesn't everyone realize at this point that it's rigged, that pretty much it'll be 1v1, all the way through to the end of the season? But all kidding aside, this week it's a fun one. I really am looking forward to this one. The most versatile player on the offensive side in college football. I will leave that to interpretation for everyone out there. So again, the topic this week, the most versatile offensive player in college football. And again, if you disagree with my selection, let us know in the comments, rate and review wherever you listen to the podcast. So Fran, I think you have the honors this week. So let's see what you got. Give us a good opening salvo.
I do. So I'm going to kick us off here with wide receiver Treylin Burks. And C-Mac, when you think of a versatile wide receiver, you think of your average, run of the mill. You like to get the ball into his hands, screen game, reverses, end arounds, shallow crosses. They're trying to create yards after catch. That's certainly Treylin Burks. He is their motion guy. He is their jet sweep guy. He's their eye candy guy. But imagine that player, because you have a picture of what that guy looks like. Now add in the vertical element. You got the go balls. You got the fades down the sideline, the deep post. You're trying to get that guy down the field so they have that vertical element, that 3-level stretch element to the offense. You have a picture of this player in your mind. Now make him 6'3", 225 pounds, because that's Treylin Burks. He is like a Madden creative player. And in case people forgot about that size, What did we see him do this weekend in that shootout against Ole Miss? He goes up and over the defensive back a couple of times, 2 straight plays where he's just mossing Rebel defensive backs down the field, 30-plus yards. He dunks on them above the rim. This guy is a monster, and we've talked about him a lot on this show. But as soon as you brought up who's the most versatile playmaker or who's the most versatile player on offense, we've said it before. Treylin Burks is like if you're watching a high school team and they're just trying to get the best player the ball every single way possible. The whole lineup inside, he'll line up outside. He'll play in line like a tight end and block. He'll line up as a wing. He'll line up in the backfield as a running back and get carries. He'll line up in the backfield as a wildcat quarterback. He's returned kicks on special teams. He was an all-SEC return man as a true freshman back in 2019. He was on the Feldman Freak list this summer. Again, ridiculous size at 6'3", 225. He's got monstrous hands. Everybody talks about how he has to wear offensive lineman gloves as a wide receiver just because of what a freak athlete he is. But again, just speaking just to that versatility, I compared him, C-Mac, to a mix of A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel, and Terrell Owens. He's got outside, inside, running back flexibility, the wing position, inline, quarterback, kick return, punt return in the SEC at 6'3", 225. There's not a lot more left to say about Treylin Burks.
You'd love to hit on like all the my favorites, it's like freakless guy, like the size, speed, like all that stuff. So definitely checks a lot of boxes there. Very good start there. That's a tough one. I kept thinking, I thought you were going to go with a Cordell Patterson at some point with the comparison there, just the way he's used at the very least, because his role has certainly evolved and he's become a key piece of the offense this year in the NFL. So Dane, we're going to go to you. Number 2. Good start for Fran, but, he left a little crack in the door. I think it could be kicked in. Let's see what you got.
So I wrote down a few names for this question, guys who maybe played multiple positions on the offensive line, some receivers who also play special teams. And Treylin Burks is a monster, no question about it. He's a first-round player. He's certainly unique, but I think the more versatile player who makes a greater impact is Notre Dame running back Kyron Williams. You look at this Notre Dame offense, they have a different quarterback each quarter. It's a revolving door there. They don't have a playmaker among the wide receivers. The offensive line might be the worst since Brian Kelly took over as head coach over a decade ago. But the glue of that offense and why they're 5-1 has been Williams because of what he means to that offensive identity. Let's take Saturday, for example, against Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech should have won that game, but the Irish kept scratching back and they won on a last-second field goal. Williams, he led the team in rushing. Okay. He led the team in receptions. He led the team in all-purpose yards. He scored twice, 1 touchdown rushing, 1 touchdown receiving. It's the second time this year he had at least 1 touchdown rushing, 1 touchdown receiving in the same game. Oh, yeah, he's also the featured punt returner for the Irish. Oh, yeah, he's also one of the better pass-blocking running backs in college football, yet to give up a sack this season, stones defenders in the hole. There's literally an award that goes to the most versatile player in college football. It's called the Paul Hornung Award, named after the legendary Hall of Famer. They announce the winner at the end of the year, but each week they have an honor roll where they recognize someone from the weekend who showed off the most impressive versatility. Who won this week? Kyron Williams. He won the Paul Hornung Weekly Award. So Kyron Williams, rushing, receiving, blocking, returning. Who else is doing all of that, plus doing it at a high enough level, making the impact that Kyron Williams is making? I don't think anybody else.
Very, very good. When you first started talking about offensive line, I'm like, is someone going to go there? Someone going to try to make the case for the most versatile offensive player in college football being an offensive lineman? We still have one more person to hear from. Ben, this is going to be you. What do we got?
Well, I'm going to go off the beaten path here, C-Mac, and go with a kicker that kicks field goals and punts. I'm just kidding. All right. But I appreciate the setup from Dane here, setting up that Paul Hornung Award in college football, one of the most versatile. But did you know, C-Mac, there's a Paul Hornung Award in high school? Because my guy won it. And that's Wandell Robinson, receiver from University of Kentucky, transferred over from University of Nebraska. He's from Louisville. That's where Paul Hornung is from. And they give out an award to in-state high school players to be the most versatile players. Wando Robinson in high school had over 8,000 yards from scrimmage, 118 touchdowns, catching, returning, receiving, rushing, just put the ball in his hands. And when he went to Nebraska, he came as a slot receiver, and they just wanted to put the ball in his hands. He was a slot receiver, C-Mac, with 133 rushing attempts. He then transfers over to Kentucky. He wants to be more of a true receiver. Now he gets to show off the yards after catch, the route running, the deep play, the tracking, all the yards after catch. Not to mention excellent hands. He only has 7 drops in his career on 176 targets. Lines up inside, outside, in the backfield. Just find a way to get him the ball. I don't know if you want to call him a Percy Harvin, a Randall Cobb, those styles of players. I think he's really his own guy. But I think what those types can do on Saturdays, converting to Sundays, especially today's, RPO game, quick game passing, and you just want to get these weapons, the ball in their hands. That's Wandell Robinson.
I love it. So really, guys, all appealing to me, making this tough. And again, if you want to debate my selection, make sure to rate and review, leave a comment wherever you listen to the podcast. So I've got to pick a winner. I'm going to be torn. There was one description I think that might put it over the top. I remember being here in 2004, watching Terrell Owens just dominate defenses for this Philadelphia Eagles team, helping this team get in position to get the number 1 seed and eventually reach the Super Bowl for the second time in franchise history. Treylin Burks, once you hear that, all the things that he does from, the motions, the run game elements to where he can line up all over the formation. It sounds like it's just a premium prospect here. Dane, even you admit that he's a monster. All great arguments, all 3 exciting players. Love to learn more about Dane. I thought it was strong with Kyron Williams, just what he's doing for that Irish offense, and Wando Robinson winning that Paul Hornung Award in high school. All very tough here, but I'll give it to Fran this week. He'll be the first with 3 wins for the year, and we'll get to rile things up once again next week. So very good job.
Did I mention that Kyron Williams is a little Brian Westbrook, a little Deuce Staley, LaShawn McCoy?
Hey, as soon as you say pass block, I was like, ooh, this does sound like a Westbrook. That thought came into mind. Another one of my all-time favorites. So
T.O. was a possession receiver. You had to scheme him open.
Well, I was the last one to get a win, and now I'm the first to 3. So, don't call it a comeback, but we're going to keep this thing rolling. C-Mac, thanks again for joining us here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. We will talk to you next week.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Well, great stuff there from C-Mac, from Ben, and from Dane. Let's now wrap the show up with Draft Mailbag. We've got a question on our Apple Podcast page from Jared Tucker, who left a 5-star review saying, Fran, I know you follow these things, and I was curious about it. Which NFL teams really like drafting small school players the most, and which do it the least? That's something that I always follow. The All-Star game process is obviously big for small school players. Which teams do it the most? All right, so Jared, that's a great question, and it's something that is certainly right in my wheelhouse. When I think of teams that draft small school players the most, the first one, honestly, I go to Steve Keim and the Arizona Cardinals. And it's funny, one of my notes that I have, just kind of looking at that team and how they've drafted over the last few years, look at some of the schools that Steve Keim has drafted from. Morgan State, Fordham, Grambling, Midwestern State, Harvard, Southeast Louisiana, Northern Iowa, Delaware State, Pittsburgh State, Murray State, JMU, and obviously they took Hassan Reddick out of a group of 5 school in Temple in the first round in the top 15 in 2017. So Arizona clearly okay with drafting small school players. That's certainly one of the edges that they think that they have in the process. Ryan Pace out in Chicago, they draft a ton of small school players. He was in New Orleans when they picked Jari Evans from Bloomsburg, and that's a team. I think they've got 11 of their 30 picks over day 3 of the draft come from the FCS level. So nearly a third of their draft choices on day 3 come from FCS. I think that's outstanding. The Saints, like I said, that's a team that they have historically been very fruitful from the FCS level. The Steelers and Kevin Colbert, they'll go not necessarily FCS, but group of 5, especially in that footprint. We've talked about the success that they've had drafting from the MAC, whether it's Antonio Brown or Deontay Johnson. You go on both sides of the football. They've had a lot of success from guys that play in the group of 5 area from that school or from that footprint of the country. You go Ohio, Western PA, Michigan, just from West Virginia, just from that area of the country. They've had a lot of success going into the small school levels. Tampa Bay and Jason Light, they've had early round picks from Eastern Kentucky and Central Michigan. They drafted from Hobart. They're not afraid to dip into the small school ranks. And then Tennessee with John Robinson coming from New England. they're typically a big school operation. They go mostly Power 5, but John Robinson, he's kind of gone against the grain there. Nearly a third of John Robinson's picks on days 1 and 2 have come from outside the Power 5 conference. You go to Corey Davis from Western Michigan, Darrington Evans from Appalachian State, Nate Davis, the starting guards from Charlotte, Taywan Taylor, Western Kentucky, Jonnu Smith, Kevin Byard. So a bunch of picks outside the Power 5. So those are a handful of schools that do it the most. Now you also asked about who does it the least. Baltimore and Eric DeCosta. Since Eric DeCosta has taken over, they've only taken a couple of non-Power 5 players. And when they've done that, they've been very productive non-Power 5 players. So Jalen Ferguson set the all-time sack record. James Prochet, one of the all-time leading receivers in college football history. Both of those guys, recent draft picks. Now remember, Eric DeCosta has only been the GM for a couple of years there in Baltimore, but that's certainly something to keep an eye out for. Brian Gutekunst in Green Bay, 84% of his picks have come from the Power 5, and just one FCS pick since he's been general manager, and that was a freak athlete in Kendall Donnerson, the outside linebacker pass rusher from the FCS level. And then Miami and Chris Greer, we've talked about them as well. The Miami Dolphins, only one of their 18 day 1 and day 2 selections since he's been GM have come outside the Power 5, and that was Robert Hunt. They've never taken an FCS player under Chris Greer. So certainly a couple of teams, and look, I think most teams tend to trend towards Power 5. That's where most of the top players come from, right? But I'm looking for the extremes here. Those were the ones that stood out to me. Jared, that was an awesome question. Thanks so much for asking it. That'll do it here for another episode of the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll be back later this week previewing everything with Ben Fennell, Ross Tucker, with Eric Galko, and with another guest right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.